Good day. I hope this finds everyone ready to discuss RLC's financial side of the house. Lisa and I have put this together, and we have basically 7 items that we'd like to go over with you. And as I start this, I'd like to begin with RLC's vision and mission is to be a congregation of Christ followers, making disciples who worship, grow, serve, and steward. We are called to be good stewards of all that is given to us. Wise investment of our time, talents, and treasures is an integral part of this calling. The investment strategies and financial guidelines of Richland Lutheran Church enhance the utilization of the resources that God has so richly blessed us to accomplish our mission. So to begin with, I'd like to discuss the budget. And right now I'm going to share my screen and we'll bring up the budget piece right now and you can follow along with it. And here we see the ministry funding proposal for 2021 summary and budget. What I'd like everyone to know is that the finance officer and the finance committee has nothing, again, I repeat, nothing to do in setting the budget. The budgets are set by the malts and approved by the council for formal approval by the congregation. So that's key. When a lot of people, when the finance officer stands up and says, this is our budget, I think a lot of folks in the congregation think that the finance officer set the budget, and that's not a true statement. So don't set the budget. The budget is done by the malts. And as you can see from this budget proposal that we're sharing, that we generally, the malts work together and look at what was the previous year budget, what has changed, what the then proposed 2021 budget is, and what sort of support they need in each of the malts. So that is our discussion there. I'm going to go ahead and scroll down on the budget, and you can take a look at each one of them as we go through. Some of them you'll see notes that there's no offsite retreat weekend then for men's ministry. That's at $55,500, and so it was less money than year before, and so on. One piece of the budget that gets confusing for council at times, and that is when we look at the benevolence. And benevolence budget is set basically by our other parts of the budget. So all of the budget gets set except for benevolence, and then benevolence is 12% of the budget, not including itself. So, for example, if the church budget is $800,000, and that's set without benevolence, we take 12% of 800,000 and then 96,000 for benevolence. So that means then our total budget with benevolence would be 896,000. Now, those are just examples, but it is something that gets confusing when we're setting the budget. And we've had a couple of years that we're trying to take 12% of the 12% that we are giving for benevolence. So that'll conclude this first phase of the budget and how the budget is set. And then we move forward from that to our next, which is going to be the income statement and balance. So I'm going to stop sharing this screen. So our next section that we're going to discuss is the income statement and balance sheet. As each malt follows the budget in their area and looks at expenses, income, expense, and budget is reported monthly. And that gives us a picture of what our performance has been for the month. Now, all of this is done on a cash basis. So, and that's how all of our information is processed, is based on a cash basis. So I'm going to share the screen here again, and we're going to do it now with our budget. So we're sharing our income statement, budget versus actual, for January through April 2021. So this is the most recent budget statement that we have. And as you can see, for April, we had tithes and offerings of $76,729. Our year-to-date tithes and offerings are $292,954 and change, and we're budgeted for tithes and offerings of approximately $838,685. It shows percent of budget of 35%. We're a quarter of the way, a little over a quarter of the way through our year, so we are tracking with respect to that. If you look at the other choice dollars, payments and fees, other contributions, and then restricted gifts, which we'll talk about a little bit later, you'll see that our total income goes up a little bit, and that and it stays, we're at 37%. Now, expenses, as we can see, and these are all set by the malts, and they're aligned here to the malts, as you can see. So for service, we had expenses of $32. We've spent $553. We budgeted for $5,450. So that 10% is for the year. We're not spending as much as we budgeted, and that's due to the fact that our services have been limited, and that at the church it should increase by June, July timeframe. On other pieces, you may see a little bit higher percentage with respect to spending, and some of that has to do with the fact, let's say, for our insurances and when we pay taxes on property taxes and things like that. So I wouldn't be too concerned if we're a percentage or so higher than how much for the year that we have, because some of it we front up front. But as you can see, most of our spending to date has been approximately right on par with what our receiving has been. So as long as we're not showing anything super high with respect to that. Now, you wonder with respect to some of these monies, and you can look at salaries and benefits here. Well, right now we switched over from one system to another with respect to our payroll and our salaries and benefits. And when we did that, we are showing an expense of for the year of $107,967, and we were budgeted $128,460, and that shows 84%. Well, in reality, that's just for that period of time. This is this month's at 45,744, and we show our expense of only 45,744, and then for the rest of the year we have an expenditure for payroll. It should be around 380,581. So we've only spent 12% of that. And what I'm going to tell you is these totals here, which is going to be approximately 509,000 in salaries, benefits, payroll. All that will be at 100% by the end of the year. So if we go down and we look at our total expenses here, and then look at our net operating income, that shows us that our expenses are really tracking well with respect to our budget, our total budget for the year, and where we're at percentage-wise. Right now, we're a little bit ahead of the game with respect to our income as it comes from tithes and giving. Our other income that you see down here and other expenses, that comes from our wealth account, our Piton Wealth account, and where we're making money for the year from our investments. And we'll talk about our investments and our other pieces in another section. But right now, this, as I scroll up, is basically our income, budget, and percent of budget for all of our expenditures in each of our areas. And we can break these down further if anybody wants to see that. And in your malts, Lisa provides the malt every month with updates so that you as a member of the malt can see how you're doing with respect to your funds, your expenses, and your percent of budget. I'm going to stop share right now, and we'll move on to our next section. So our next section is what I call a budget breaker for the malts. And what that would be is if we end up with some unexpected expenditure that we hadn't planned for, and it's significant with respect to the amount of monies that we have budgeted for the malt, especially in that area. And what happens then is that the team should immediately notify Steve and Lisa, and they'll notify me with respect to the issue that we've got that's going to be a budget breaker, and what sort of plan we can come up with, and where we will get the monies to solve it, or how we can cut back, or what we can do with respect to that. And I'll go back to where we were last year with the beginning of COVID. And with the beginning of COVID, we saw that we were going to have some significant budget breakers with respect to the church and our budget and our income. As you well know, when COVID hit and things started looking grim as the pandemic was moving forward, some people were doing their normal work. Some people ended up out of work in the congregation, and our gifting and tithings ended up being a lot lower than we had expected. Due to that, we called a meeting for all the malts and all the groups, and we said, hey, look, we probably need to cut back about 20% of our budget for the year. And each of the malts worked to get a budget brought back about 20%. Then the other thing that we did, which you understand and I think know about, is we looked at the PPP loans from the Small Business Administration, the payroll loans, so that we could look at having enough money and being able to keep everybody on staff at RLC. And those funds came into us in two different pieces. One was a $2,000 or $10,000 grant, and then the other was the Triple P itself. And for a total funding, and I'm just talking off the top of my head, we got about $114,000 from the Small Business Administration for us for the payroll protection plan. So those funds came in, and they came in first as a loan, but we knew that they were going to provide a lot of grants with respect to that if we spent our monies on the requirements for the Triple P, which was payroll, utilities, if we had a mortgage, which we didn't have a mortgage, and other things like that. And Lisa went above and beyond the call of duty here, working with Giza and the other entities in the Small Business Administration for us to be able to then attain the funds. We obviously used the funds for what they were purposed for, and we kept a separate set of books with respect to that, because what we didn't know is whether those funds were going to be as a loan or a grant. And in the end, when we provided all of our paperwork back to the Small Business Administration and the government, the loan was forgiven, and basically we received $114,000 as $114,000, correct, as a grant for us. So those were the funds that came in, and we didn't find out about that until the beginning of this year. So they hit the books as income for us with respect to that. So those are things like we would talk about budget breakers. We could have an HVAC system failure, other things like that we hadn't planned on. We do plan on maintenance costs, but some things we can't plan on. So that would be what I would call a budget breaker, or something that we have to do to be able to change. Now, as that happens, we need council approval on anything like that, or to go into our reserves or use the money. And the council did know that we were doing the Triple P, and I think I kept the council well informed on that, and then where we sit with it. So that's section 4 for us, and I'm going to go ahead and move to section 5, which is our investment strategy and our investment portfolio with Piton Wealth. So I'm going to go ahead and share the screen here and put up our monthly Piton Wealth for the church. These are the summaries that we get every month. And since year to date, we started out with our account. We have increased our account from $809,000 to $836,000 for the account. So you can see right over on the account here, the growth year to date. This period, we gained 18,000, and that it tells us what our activities have been, our top holdings that we do with this account. And the one thing that I will tell you is that we no longer at the church deal in individual stocks and bonds that we trade. We basically are using Piton Wealth to determine all of our investments. what the finance committee does, and it's a finance committee that is in discussions with the investment company, and we do this. We talk to them on a semi-annual basis, or if we need to, a shorter basis, to set what our risk category would be for our investments. And our whole basis for our investment portfolio is never to lose our principal. And so we basically have assigned a very conservative, and what one would consider conservative to moderate conservative, very low risk investment options for Piton Wealth to provide us the management. So we tell them what risk level we're willing to attain, and they then make the determinations for the portfolio for what happens. Now that is a change from many years ago, when we would also basically deal in stocks and bonds, and there was the finance committee and team was basically deciding what we would trade, what we would hold, and what we would do. We don't do that anymore. Now, if someone provides a gifting of investments, which can happen, somebody passes away in the church and they want to pass. What we do now is, instead of holding those securities and those investments that somebody else is gifting to us, those would be sold at the current rate, current market rate, and then that would be moved into our holdings at Piton Wealth and invested in the same way. So the finance committee and the finance team does not at all deal in individual stocks and bonds or what Piton Wealth decides for us. And you can see here that they are in different bond funds, value shares, strategic income, and capital stock driven, small capital, that, and the percentages for some of those. Plus we keep cash reserves, as you can see, for us, that we could endeavor, if the council approves and we need to go into this reserve funding, to be able to use. I'm going to go ahead and stop share there. That is our investment strategy and our 5th of 7 areas that we're going to talk about. And we're going to start and screen share here the April balance sheet and discuss right now. You can see from the balance sheet, our discussion here is going to be on restricted and unrestricted funds, but I can also talk to you about the balance sheet as we go through. And the balance sheet here shows all of our assets and that, and then our basically total assets and wealth here, and then our liabilities and equity, so that we come down to our total liability and equities. Now, just so you know, last year we, and this is last year's April, we took a big hit when we demolished the houses and that on the property, and about $300,000 worth of value on a cash basis was lost, and it's been made up. But what we wanted to talk about here is restricted and unrestricted funds that we have with respect to basically it's in our reserve account here that's with Piton Wealth. And as you can see here, let's look at the capital fund, the cornerstone fund here. We've got 184,637 in it, 184,000. Last year, this time we had 169,782. So it's been increased by people giving donations, which are restricted when they go to that, versus unrestricted. And as you look at our listings here, each of the malts and ministries has basically some equity accounts here that are in savings that have restrictions on them. And the funds with restrictions that is listed is around 960,000. My problem with restricted funds is they're restricted. Our issue is that some of these accounts have restricted funds that have not been used for 10 or 15 years. And the question is are they going to ever be used for that? And that's up for the council to decide. And later in the year, we're going to be talking and looking very closely at these funds and whether or not we should take them out of restricted status and place them in unrestricted. Now, right here, you're going to see the Retreat Center 32,150. And that account is now up to 132,649. Last April, it was at 116,267. That one is one that the congregation and we have had the discussions on in taking those funds and distributing them. And the distribution we made now as percentages, because they first were made as dollar amounts, and then you can see it's increased, another $16,000. So we're doing it at percentage, and those funds will then be distributed here after the next congregational vote and meeting for it. But what I wanted to show you was we do have some significant restricted funds and versus unrestricted funds for us to be able to use for the church. And that in gifting to the church, some people gifted many moons ago, 25, 30, 50 years ago, and they restricted the funds. And now at this point in time, should we look at releasing those and putting them in unrestricted if they're not going to be used for that occasion? So I'm going to stop sharing this screen, and we have one last section to discuss, which is pass-through and gifts. Okay, so right now we're at our 7th piece for this, and I'm going to go ahead and share the screen again. We're going to talk about pass-throughs that the church does, and let me share a screen here. And there we go. So on pass-throughs, what we're talking about is that when our giving occurs and people give money to the church, they will designate funds for Good News Media, RLC Foundation, Operation Christmas Child, Holy Jacob Church, Second Harvest, Grace Clinic, Bite to Go, and Union Gospel Mission. And these, if you look at 26,000 here, Gifts for others is at 11,162.08. So those funds come in, and then we have to pass through. And as of April, that's how much we've handled pass-through funding here for this. What I'm going to tell you is, as I stop sharing that, is that the pass-throughs do create issues with us and accountability for this. And what we're going to be proposing to the council, and we'll talk about this as we move forward on the council, is that we look at 5 pass-throughs. And the 5 major pass-throughs that we have are Good News Media, RLC Foundation, Operation Christmas Child, and Holy Jacob. And excuse me, that's only 4. So 4 of them that we feel are definitely appropriate, and definitely we can continue through Lisa and the finance side of the house to do. For Second Harvest, Grace Clinic, and Bite to Go, which was a piece of Second Harvest, and Union Gospel Mission, we think that any funds that are to be given to them could go directly to them. They all have websites. They all have the ability for people to provide monies to them. They are all 501c3s. They are similar as a nonprofit as we are. So that concludes our presentation for finance and for the finance part of RLC Church. And I want to thank you for your time. I'm sure there will be generated some questions, and I'm happy to answer your questions from our committee, Gary Weibel, John Umbarger, myself, and Lisa. We appreciate your time. And if you've got any questions for us, please don't hesitate and ask us. Shalom.